the height. And then let's give it some margin. So once again, top margin, side margin, bottom margin, side margin. And there we go. And finally, I just want to change this button. It's not really the style that I'm going for. Of course, this was a great button to show you all the different things that we can do to a button, but let's change it for the sake of this design. So I'm just going to get rid of the majority of this now. Save that. I'm going to give it padding 10 pixels instead. Let's give it a background color. I'm going to use the orange that is in my logo. That's EF866C. I'm going to give it a width, 80 pixels. Of course, a border radius, because I'm partial to border radiuses. I'm going to say 20 pixels. I'm going to say the font should be white. That is white. And I also want the text to be uppercase. So whenever there's a button, we're going to transform the text to be uppercase and font size 12 pixels. Let's also align the text so it's center. So text align center. There we go. So I've changed the button. However, I'm not going to change much about the hover. Actually, maybe let's change the hover to a slightly, because at the moment it just goes red. Let's change it to a slightly more orange. So I'm going to use EF744B. This is one I found on the internet earlier. Okay, I think that's looking good. And if the button's active, well, we still have the box shadow inset. And I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to keep it. Let's go back to here now. And instead of click me, I'm going to put hire me. And we'll link that up to something soon. Okay, so we have this here. The one last thing I want to add is an image. So once again, I'm going to drop in an image that I have previously made. It's an image called Working Illustration. I'm just going to drop it in here. So let's just make sure that I don't want that one in there. Just going to change it. Working illustration PNG. Great. And inside this div, I'm going to get the image tag. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to use the source of the relative path. I'm going to go into my images folder and I'm going to get the working illustration PNG. Great. So there it is. It's very large. Don't worry, don't forget to give it some alternate text for the visually impaired. Working illustration of a woman. Awesome. Let's also give this a class. We can style it. I don't like the size, so class hero image. And let's go into here. And right under the, I like to keep everything roughly together. So under the hero info, I'm just going to have hero image. And let's make sure to give it a size that makes sense so it fits. Just going to give it that size right here. And once again, I'm going to give it a margin because I don't like it being so close to here. I'm going to say margin 30 pixels. Okay, so if we go into the larger size like this, we can see both. And if we start moving into the tablet, so ideally this looks good and this looks good. However, I don't really like it when it's like here. We'll have to fix that, as I said, when we start doing more responsive work. So this is talking about breakpoints. But for now, let's carry on. So I'm liking how this looks here. Let's get rid of this now. We don't need this now. We don't need to see how the div is looking. And there we go. I'm also going to get rid of this hero background. I don't want it to be this color anymore. I just want it to take on the color of whatever is the body. So in the body here, I'm going to say background color. And this is a sort of off gray. And perfect. Next up, the About Me section. I'm just going to move this over for now like this, so we can work on the About Me section. So let's go back in here. So once again, I'm going to have to split out the About Me section into 2 divs. So as you can see here in the purple under the hero div, and then each of the 2 purple divs is going to have a different amount of divs in it, stacked on top of each other. So let's do it. Hopefully this is becoming more clear to you. We're going to do exactly what we did for the hero section, but to the About Me section. So in this section right here, I'm going to make a div. I'm going to call it, I'm going to give it a class of About Me. So there's our one div, and there's our second div. Once again, I'm just going to give it a class so we can see what is happening. So second, into here, under our section, About Me, and then second. So width 300 pixels, height 300 pixels, background color blue, and margin 5 pixels. And then same for the second. Once again, you will see the 2 divs. Now what is quite good about this is that they are in the section, their parent is section, so we are already adding the flex wrap to it, meaning that they will stack. However, it's got a lot of other stuff in here too, so let's sort that out. First off, in the About Me section, well, it is confined to a height, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so there we go, it's now stretched. It also has some other things in here which I don't want, so let's go back in here. I'm actually gonna, so in the first box, I want to put in my image. So let's do that for the About Me. Let's get the image. And then in here, put in the image. So that is looking good. And then in the second box, I'm going to put the H2 tag. Okay, and then we have some socials, which looks fine if we view our site in a browser of these proportions. However, if we get any larger, the socials go to the right. I don't want this happening. I want them to stack over each other. So I'm going to take all of these. I'm going to remove them from this section. So that's looking better. And I'm just going to create another section. So it's got its own separate section now. And let's just post them in here. Okay. So this is the great thing about classes. I've essentially reused the styling for sections. So now each of my sections has this red and yellow gradient. I could just repeat section over again. And there we go. I don't actually like the colors of this section, so let's just make it white. Go background color, white. And there we go. So even though this is technically 2 sections, you can't really see the difference, but they are staying in the correct layout that I want at all times. Great. Now let's get to some styling. Okay, now I'm just gonna get rid of the blue boxes for now, and we also don't need this second box right here. So I'm gonna get rid of that second, and I'm actually gonna call this info instead, because that makes more sense. And once again, just get rid of the height and the background color for the about me. Let's make sure that the image always stays in the center. So let's do justify content space evenly. Okay. And let's add some text for the about me section. So once again, I'm just going to use a paragraph tag. And I'm just going to put some text. This can be just a little bit about yourself. It's totally up to you. I'm just putting some placeholder text here for you. Okay, so we have our text. It is quite long. Once again, we get this problem, so we can easily fix this with, you guessed it, applying a max width. So we gave it the class of info. I'm going to say max width 300 pixels. Okay, it's looking better. And I'm also going to give it a margin of 30 pixels. Everything in here, I'm basically giving a margin of 30 pixels. I just think it looks quite nice. Let's do the same for the image here. Margin 30 pixels. Actually, no, let's get rid of it from there. Okay, so this looks good. However, it doesn't look so great when we suddenly switch it out. So I'm going to apply some styling to the section. Of course, please be aware that it will apply to this, but I'm absolutely fine with that. I don't mind. I think it'll look quite good. So let's find a section and give it a margin. We just want the top. So I'm going to put 40 pixels, and then the size we want 0. Padding. There we go. Actually, we might make it 0, 0. Okay, I think that's already looking better. We're slowly getting there. Slowly but surely. So there we have it. You can, of course, feel free to edit this as you wish. I'm sure some of you have different ideas when it comes to styling. This is only a tutorial for you to take and use as you want. Let's check the about me is linking correctly, and boom, there we go. About me, boom, is taking us directly to that section. I'm really pleased with that. And let's just check for mobile. That is also looking good too. Okay, now I want to put some social links here. However, first, before we move on, let's actually create a contact me form. So that's what I'm going to do. Forms up next. Okay, so next up, we are going to learn all about forms. So let's start creating our form using HTML and CSS first. For a form, we will need some type of script in order to actually submit the form. So it's going to be a great segue into learning a little bit of JavaScript. But before we get onto that point, let's get it working visually first. So let's decide where we're going to do this. Well, I'm actually going to create a new section for this. So once again, I am creating a section. There we go. And in this section, I'm going to use a form tag. So once again, this is not something I'm making up. This is pre-made for us and opening up our form. You won't see anything in it now. This is because we actually have to start putting stuff into our form first. Now I'm going to put an h2 tag in here. That is absolutely fine. You don't just need to put inputs into a form. So here is my first thing that I'm going to put into the contact form, and that is just an H2 tag. You'll see that showing up right here. Now, the form element can contain one or more of the following form elements: an input tag, a text area tag, a button, a select option, an option itself, a field set, a label, and an output. So I'm going to show you some of these now. Let's create our first part of this form, and that is a way for someone to input their first name and last name. So I'm going to create a label. This is so we can actually see what the form options are for. So label for first name, make sure that it's an equal sign, and I'm just going to put first name like so we can see it. And the next thing we need to do is create an input. So here we have an input tag. I want to specify that the type of input we take is text. I'm also going to give an ID so we can work with it later. So this is just the correct things that you need to put with an input field. First name. And I'm also going to give it a name of first name. This is also that we can use it with our JavaScript later on. And in here, I can also put in a placeholder. We can do this by simply adding another attribute. And I'm just going to put John. So there we go. That's how you put a placeholder in. Of course, this will disappear if I start writing on it. It's just a placeholder. As mentioned, at the moment, this isn't connected to anything. That's what our JavaScript is going to do. I'm just going to really push that out for now so we can see everything in full. So there we have our first label. Let's do the same for a second name. Second name. Second name, or maybe we could put last name. That probably makes more sense. Last name. And then again, I'm going to put a placeholder name of Doug. So that is one example of an input. It is a text input. I'm going to show you another now. So another input that we can have is a radio button option. If you don't know what a radio button option is, I'm going to show you here. So once again, we use the input tag. I'm going to put type radio, and you will see we get a little dot that you can select, show up like that. So that's pretty cool. Once again, it has no functionality. And once again, we need to give it an ID and a name. So I'm going to go with ID, and I'm going to use this for displaying office work, name, office work. And it actually does need a value, even though you can't see it for now. I'm going to put in. Anyway, it's for later on in our JavaScript. And once again, let's not forget to give it a label. So label, this is for the button itself. For office. And then I'm just going to put office. So what I'm getting here, so I'm going to put that label below. That looks more sense. That looks better. So you can select office like so. Just going to do a few more. So I'm just going to do maybe 3. So we've got office. I'm going to change this one to remote work. And once again, make the label say remote work so we can see it visually in our browser. And then this one, I'm just going to put other. Okay, so now I have 3 options, 3 little buttons. That is looking cool. So we've got a text input, we've got a radio button. What else can I show you? Well, there's also another type of button, and that is a checkbox. So why don't we go ahead and create that? It is also an input tag. Type, we're going to put checkbox So once again, you can see it's already a checkbox. And once again, I need to give it an ID. And this time I want my checkbox to tell me if it's contract work. So I'm just going to put ID contract, name, contract, and value. Contract. This might seem like overkill, but it will make sense when we start doing the JavaScript. So we've got our input. Let's give it a label. Label for contract. Label. And then just so we can see the text, contract work. Okay, and once again, I'm just going to create 2 more. Make sure they are formatted correctly too. And that label is spelled correctly. Label. So we've got contract work. Let's make the second one full time. So once again, full time. And this one we'll put sponsorship. Sponsorship. Great. So we have all our fields that we want. We now need an on submit button. And this again is going to have to be an input. So there we go. Submit. So we've got a button here. Type submit. Value submit. And then I'm going to add the class that I used for this button here because I want all my buttons to look the same. Class button. Ta-da! So I don't actually need this here because it's picking up from the value. And there we go. Okay, this is looking good. Let's just make sure to make it look nice. So this is where some of our layout work is going to come into. At the moment, if I pull this out, it's just all appearing on one line. I want it to appear stacked over each other and then on one line for some occasions. So let's do it like so. I'm going to make a div. I'm going to give it a class of input section. So at the moment you'll see that that has split out this first one here. Let's do the same for the second batch of inputs. Once again, closing div. Make sure to format correctly so it's more readable. And then last one. And a closing div. And make sure to format it so it's more readable. So now, instead of them all being in one line, because I've put them in 3 separate divs, the 3 divs are stacking over each other. So that's one step in the right direction. Let's go to our styling. And then towards the bottom. So I'm going to do it here. Input section. I'm going to put margin. I'm going to space them out at the top, but not the sides. Okay, so that's looking much better. I mean, it would be nicer if this perhaps fit on one row instead. So let's do that up here too. I'm going to put the first name and surname in a separate div. That's one div. It's a second div. And then I'm going to give this a class so that the first name is over the input. I want to give it maybe input group. They are grouped together. Same for this one. and then here, dot input group, display flex, direction, column. And then let's give it a max width too. So just a width will be fine. Or actually, perhaps we don't need this. And then for the input section, display flex. Okay. And let's give this a margin. So it gets a margin just to the right. That would be 0, 5 pixels, 0, 0. Okay, and this is looking a lot better. Nice. Let's perhaps give the form a bit of space down here. So I'm going to put up here, form, margin. Nothing from the top, nothing from the side. 40 pixels at the bottom and nothing from the other side. Okay, great. You can, of course, play around with these as much as you like. It is totally up to you. It's obviously however you wish to display these things. Same for the footer. Perhaps you want it to appear in the middle. Once again, I'm just going to use display flex and justify content center to do that. Great. This is all looking really good. There's 3 more things that I want to do before moving on to JavaScript, and that is learn how to use icons, create a new page, and talk about breakpoints. So let's do it. In this section, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we can include pre-made icons into our project with the help of something called Font Awesome. Let's do it. Font Awesome is the most popular way to add font icons to your website. Font icons are created using scalable vectors, so you can use high-quality icons that work well on any screen size. I'm going to show you how to do this now. So I'm just going to minimize this. You can already see all the cool icons that we can use. All we need to do is get started. So get started for free. I'm going to put in my email address and then get sent the start kit code. So you will see that I've already got it sent to me, but you should receive some code that looks a little bit like this. Okay, so click to confirm your email. Select a password. So I'm just going to select a strong password. Ania Kubo. Just going to leave this to 2020. And also, let's go. Okay, so you first need to add your kit's code to a project. So I'm going to copy this script and head over to my index.html file where I will put it in the header. So just under the link here, I'm going to put in my special link to Font Awesome. Now I'm going to pick a free icon. So let's just go ahead and for the sake of this, use this one. Make sure to be in free. You can of course choose a paid one too, but for this, I'm just going to use a free version. And then you can choose the color. You can essentially edit this as much as you like. I'm going to click start using this icon. And then I'm simply going to copy this, go back to our code, and then the index.html file, where you can see these divs here, I'm just going to replace it like so. And there you go. You will see my user circle show up. Now I can of course edit these more and more if I want. However, you might have to upgrade for this. There is so many you can choose from. For example, if I want to start using this icon, I'm just going to copy that. And once again, put that in my project. And you will see that I can go ahead and replace all of them. Okay? So that is how you would use Font Awesome icons. There are plenty of free ones, there are paid ones too, and you can, of course, edit them, the colors and how large they are based on your preference. If I want to pick one out, I can simply pick out one of these words. So I'm going to choose far, as it's the class name that is appropriate for all of them. So I know that we mentioned that elements can have more than one class name. This is a great example of that. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to pick out far, and I'm going to give each one a margin of 3 pixels. Okay, so that immediately spaces them all out. At the moment, these are not linked to anything, but please feel free to link them up using the href, similar to how we did with the list items. That is also an option too. Now let's move on to creating new pages. So as you can see, I have my Contact Me section right here. Let's go ahead and move it to the contact page because I think it will make a lot more sense there. So I'm going to essentially take this entire section. So I'm taking the entire section here. You will see now that the form is gone. And I'm going to actually put it into my contacts HTML page and save. So now, if I click on my contact page, you will see that the form shows up. Once again, I'm going to put this in my browser, click on the contact, and there we go. As a reminder, you will see that the URL has also changed. So the URL is taking us to the pages directory and then our contact page. At the moment, this page is not really built out. We cannot even go back to our home page from this page. We will need to essentially delete the URL in order to do that. So that is something that you might want to consider working on if you do want to have more than one page in your project. Let's go back. Okay, so even though this is looking great, I am also going to keep a copy of this in my index.html file. There's no one telling me that it can't be in both places, so I'm going to keep it like that. Okay, so I think we are now ready to move on to talk a little bit about breakpoints. So far in this tutorial, we made a web page with rows and columns. It was responsive, but it did not look great when we changed the size of the screen to just about here. We were left with a lot of white space. To fix this, we need to talk about breakpoints, and media queries can help us with that. We can add a breakpoint where a certain part of the design will behave differently on each side of the breakpoint. Media query is a CSS technique introduced in CSS 3. It uses the @media rule to include a block of CSS properties only if a certain condition is true. For example, here, if the browser window is 600 pixels or smaller, the background color will be yellow. Let's check it out. Okay, now let's see this with an example. So here we have our page. Once again, I am happy with it when it's in mobile. I'm happy with it when it's in browser. I'm not happy with it when it's around here. Okay, so let's change that. I'm going to guess that the width of my page is about 600 pixels. So if anything is under 600 pixels, I want the text to stretch and I want to make the image disappear. So we can do this like this. I'm going to get @media only screen and max width 600 pixels. Just going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see. So now, if our browser is under 600 pixels, I want the hero info to have a width of 600 pixels. So you will see 600, over 600, over 600, over 600, and under 600. And you will see that text is now spread. So once again, over 600, under 600. So perhaps we can even make it larger. Let's make it max width 800, 700. You could just fiddle around with this, whatever feels good to you. So there we go, and that's when the switch happens. You can even see it in slow motion. There we go. And then make the max width 650 or 700 actually, just to make it fit the whole way. And there we go. Okay, now let's make the image disappear. So make sure you are in the curly braces and at the breakpoint of 700 pixels. I want you to get the hero image and visibility hidden. Okay, so we can see the image and then can't see the image. It's disappeared. I'm also going to make the height 0 pixels. So that looks a lot better. And there we go. So I'm pretty impressed with that. I think that looks a lot better. We are simply getting rid of the image once it gets the 700 pixel breakpoint. You can also have as many breakpoints as you like. So obviously there's ours and boom. And then it disappears. It is totally up to you. Try it again with a color just to get some practice with it. Let's do about the footer. So the footer changes color. That should be quite simple for us to see. So let's scroll down to the footer and then right below it, add media, only screen, and then max width. So let's set the max width this time to 500 pixels. So as soon as our browser gets to 500 pixels, so if we're going this way, 500 over 500 pixels, over 500 pixels, over 500 pixels, under 500 pixels, the color will change. So let's grab our footer. So let's grab our footer and make the background color blue. Refresh. Once again, over 500 pixels, over 500 pixels, over 500 pixels, over 500 pixels, under 500 pixels, blue, over, under, over, under. So that is pretty cool. Now, of course, we can also have min width as well. So if I change that to min width and save, the opposite will happen. So a lot of developers actually design mobile first, which means they will make sure that the design looks perfect in a mobile form. You will find that most websites do get visited the most from mobile, so perhaps this is why the shift happened. It also means that if you design mobile first, you will need to use the min width on your media queries, because as you get larger, so then you start designing for tablet, then you will apply a style. And then if you want a different style for desktop, well, you can add another min width. So that's it, max width and min width. It just depends what browser you are designing for first and what you feel most comfortable with. Okay, let's move on. I think it's now time to start writing some JavaScript. But before we do that, let's recap everything we have learned so far about HTML and CSS. Let's take a quick break to talk a little bit about the Z-index. I'm going to do that now. The Z-index property specifies the stack order of an element. An element with greater stack order is always in front of an element with a lower stack order. I'm going to show you what I mean by this and how we can use the Z-index. So here we have my index.html file. I'm just going to go ahead and put into divs. So here is one div. Let's give it a class first block and then div second block. Now let's go into our style sheet, which is in the source folder. Let's grab the first block. So just like we did here, we need to get the class. So I'm going to use a dot for class, and then open up our curly braces. So that is our first block. I'm going to style it up a bit. So I'm just going to give it 100 pixels width and a height of 50 pixels and a background color of coral. And I'm just going to copy this. We're going to have 2 blocks. So it's the first block and it was the second block. So once again, that is a class. So we need the dot. And I'm just going to call it second block. And let's give it another color so we can tell. So there we have it. Now, I can actually move. So I'm just going to give this a position of absolute. By saying position absolute, I'm saying that I want the position of the first block to be absolute. What I mean by this is by giving the position property the value of absolute, we are making sure the element is positioned relative to its first positioned ancestor element. So I have given the body some styling. If I was to just comment that out and refresh, that is the absolute position, okay? It will always be there. That is absolute. And if I was to do the same for the second block, it will be in the same position. They're not appearing inline or block. I can then move the second block. So let's give it a left 50 pixels. So I've literally moved the second block, which is a light sea green, 50 pixels to the right by giving a left spacing. So given it left spacing of 50 pixels, I can go 150 pixels. I can go 80 pixels. Okay, that is just one example of how I would use position absolute and left. Now, say we had this styling, but I actually wanted the second block to appear below the first block. Okay, so what I mean by this is I want the orange block to be more visible and the green block to be below it. I could do this with the Z index. So I could either choose to give the first block a Z index of 1, and that would move it above the green or second block, which has a default Z index of 0. I could also have chosen to give the second block a Z index of -1. Okay? Both things would do the same thing. That is how the Z index works. Sometimes when you have more than one or more than 2 elements apart from yours on your screen, you would have to increase the Z index from -1 to -2, -3, or -99 to be safe if you do really want it to be at the very, very bottom of the stack. Okay. So that is how the Z index works. I'm going to ask you to do this by yourself with a little challenge. So I'm just going to get rid of all these. So make sure in your style CSS, you just have a body with a background color. And then in your index HTML file, I'm just going to refresh this. We're going to have a first block, a second block, a third block, and a fourth block. So third, fourth. So that is my index HTML file. That is my style sheet. I want you to essentially build out the 4 blocks as circles. So I want you to create 4 circles and stack them on top of each other. So but visibly on top of each other like we just did, to have the first block at the top and the fourth at the bottom. Okay? So 4 blocks, or let's just be more precise, 4 circles that are stacked on top of each other. As a clue, I've made this example. This is what I want you to recreate in your browser. You can make the colors different, you can make the spacing different, that part is up to you. Okay, I'm going to pause here while you have a go at doing this. So once again, this is what your index HTML file should look like, and this is what your style sheet should look like. Okay? Good luck. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so if you've managed to do that, well done. If you haven't, don't worry. We're going to go through the solution together. So I'm just going to make sure that I've saved these files. We don't need the index.js file for now. So the first thing I would do is grab my first circle. I'm just going to grab the first circle. Let's open up our curly braces. Let's actually style it up so we can see it. I'm going to use 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. And then a border radius 25 pixels to make it a circle, making sure to spell border radius correctly. And background color, let's say salmon. And I am actually going to reinstate this because I do want it to be in the center. So that is my first circle. I'm actually going to make it a bit bigger. Why not? It's a bit small. So there we go. My first circle. I'm actually just going to copy this for the second circle. And let's give it another color this time. Let's make it a bit lighter. It's not lighter. Let's make it lighter. Go. And then we need a third circle. Once again, I'm going to make it even lighter. And a fourth circle, which once again, you guessed it, I'm going to make even lighter. So we've got our 4 circles. Now I want them to stack over each other. So let's do that first. Well, I could do that in the body. So I can simply write flex direction column. And there we go. They are stacking over each other. I'm also going to give it a margin left so we can see it. 150 pixels. It's just for us. Let's get rid of that. And now let's do some positioning and Z indexing. So for this one, position absolute. So it might appear to be disappeared, but it's just because all the circles will now be in the same position roughly or exactly. So there we go. So that is our absolute positioning. Now the first circle, well, that was the darkest, wasn't it? So let's give that a Z index of -4. And I'm also going to give it a top of 400 pixels. So now it's moved all the way down there. That is fine for now. We will be adjusting these. This one I want to be the third last, so I'm going to give it a -3 index and top 300 pixels. Actually, maybe let's make it go down a bit more. So let's go 350 pixels. Okay, so you already see it is stacking. This one, we're going to give it a Z index of -2 and a top of 300 pixels. There we go. And then finally the full circle, which is the top circle. I mean, I could just leave it as it is, in fact. So top 250 pixels. And there we go. We have now completed the challenge. It is absolutely fine if you chose to do the Z indexes the other way, so use positive numbers or chose different colors or chose a different sort of styling. As long as you've got them stacking to look similarly to this, you have passed the challenge. So well done. I hope you've enjoyed this little challenge with me. Let's carry on with our lessons. Congratulations, everyone. You have now finished the CSS section of our bootcamp. Next up, it is time to focus on JavaScript. Now, even though we have finished the CSS portion, there will be some extra lessons in the next section too, as CSS and JavaScript are often closely intertwined. For now, I would save the project we have been working on and put it away. While we will go back to it at one point in the course, that part of our learning is now over, and we should start up a new project or window in our code editor. JavaScript is considered to have a different way of thinking than CSS and HTML. It can take a while to get used to it and for it to stick. This is why this section is going to have a lot more exercises and projects along the way. Don't worry though, when you understand the way of thinking in JavaScript, it will become second nature to you. Something will just click. Patience and persistence will be key in this section, so please do pause and go over a section again if something is not clear the first time round. Once again, I will be providing code playgrounds for each of the lessons, so if you do start a new section or for some reason your code editor is not working, please use the time-stamped code playgrounds in the descriptions below. Okay, so what are we waiting for? Let's do it, JavaScript. We will be starting off with some basics and moving on to the fun stuff once we get an understanding of the fundamentals first, such as what is a variable, a function, and so on. Okay, now it's time for the JavaScript portion of our course. But what exactly is JavaScript? JavaScript is a scripting or programming language that allows you to implement complex features on web pages. Every time a web page does more than just sit there and display static information for you to look at, you can bet JavaScript is probably involved. It is the third layer of the cake when it comes to standard web technologies, two of which we have already covered are HTML and CSS. JavaScript is not to be confused with Java, which is a completely different language in itself. So, to recap, JavaScript is not Java, it is a completely different language. JavaScript is also one of the core technologies of the World Wide Web. This is alongside HTML and CSS. JavaScript essentially allows us to have interactive web pages. So as in the case of the form that we are currently working on, it will allow us to add functionality to that form and send off information for us. What is even more exciting is that we can actually add extra levels or superpowers to our JavaScript code with so-called application programming interfaces, or APIs. APIs are ready-made sets of code building blocks that allow a developer to implement programs that would otherwise be hard or impossible to implement. Think of it in a way as Lego blocks. You're building something in Lego and then you suddenly see a whole other part that's already been pre-built for us. We can essentially take that part and put it into our project. That is what an API is in a nutshell. Don't worry, we'll be looking at some real examples of this later on. So in this part of the course, this is going to be the biggest part of the course as there is a lot to learn. We've already covered the core concepts of JavaScript. Next up, we're going to have a look at variables and then control flow, which includes if statements, for loops, operators, then classes, functions, methods, and HTTP. There's a lot to get through. I'm excited. Let's do it. In this section, I want to talk to you about file setup when working with JavaScript. Let's do it. So, up until now, we've only been working with HTML and CSS. This is some boilerplate for our HTML, which we discussed in the previous section. I also have a link to link our style sheet, so our styles CSS file, which is here. We have told in our IDE that this is a CSS file by giving it a CSS extension, file extension, and hence we get this little logo right here. Now, how do we get to adding JavaScript? Well, first off, I'm actually just going to make a JavaScript file. I'm going to call it index.js. So JavaScript, JS is for the JavaScript. We are telling our IDE that this is a JavaScript file, and enter. And you will see the JavaScript logo shows up, which means this is correct. This has worked. We've got our index.js file. Now, if we go back to our index.html, I can use a script tag. So similarly to how I did here, I can simply put a script tag like so, so an opening and closing script tag, and then the source of this is going to be my index.js file. Now it is best practice to put the index.js and style sheet in a file of its own, or a folder of its own, sorry. So I'm going to make a new directory and call it source. In it, I'm going to put my index.js and style CSS. This might not make sense now, but when it comes to building projects and deploying them onto the internet, it makes sense to have the source folder different to the build folder. So that is how we would do it. This, however, means we get some error messages because before, the index.html file was in the same directory, so the root of our project with the style CSS file. It can't find it anymore because we are telling our index.html file that the style sheet is here with it in the root. It is not, nor is the index.js. So we need to fix this by going into our source folder and getting the style sheet. And once again, going into our source folder and getting the index.js file. And there we go. We have now fixed the errors. Now, if you do wish to keep your script file in the header, and this is important, so I'm just going to open this up yet, we would have to actually wait for all the HTML to be loaded before applying any JavaScript. So to do this, I would have to add this piece of code, which we will start talking about much later in this lesson. So I'm just going to show you for now, but keep it in mind because we will go back to it. I would have to use a add event listener to listen out for when the content is loaded. So like that. And then once all of our HTML has loaded, then, so DOM content loaded, and only then will we be able to execute any JavaScript. Okay, so that is one approach. It is totally up to you if you use it this way, or you can get rid of that and simply move our script tag to be at the very bottom of our body. So in this case, you'd have to remember to write all your HTML above the script tag at all times. Each way is correct. The first one is considered to be maybe a little bit more foolproof, but both work. For small projects, each one is fine. I'm going to carry on by using this approach for this course. Okay, I think we now have the setup down. If you are using the code sandbox like I am, there is a preference that I like to use. If you go into the file and into the preference settings and choose sandbox settings, in the prettier settings, I have chosen to essentially get rid of my semicolons. This is a personal preference as well. I don't want the semicolons being added if I save a file. I've also chosen to use single quotes. So these are two of my preferences. This is what you're going to be seeing in the course. So if you like the way I write it, then please feel free to change these. Or if you don't want to, that's absolutely fine too. The choice is up to you. So that is how you go into it. Once again, it's File, Preferences, Code Sandbox Settings, and Prettier Settings. These settings, the prettier settings, will essentially be applied each time you save a file. Great. Let's carry on. First lesson of JavaScript, let's go. First up, variables. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to take a little moment to talk to you about the file structure here. So as previously, we have our index.html file in the root of our project, meaning it's at the very base of our project. I have then created a directory called source, in which I have stored my style sheet. So just like we were working with before when it was just CSS and HTML, however, I have put it in its own folder. And then we have an index.js file in here now too. So this is new. I have named it index, and I have told my code editor to treat this as a JavaScript file based on the extension. I have put these in a source folder. It might not make sense now. You might think, why am I bothering to do this? However, when it comes to actually deploying what we built, this is a very important step. I'm not going to go into it too much now. However, just be aware of that. It is something that we're going to cover when it comes to deploying our project. Okay, So as a recap, make sure the index.html file is always in the root and store your style sheet and index.js files in a source folder. Okay, let's get to our first lesson of JavaScript. So in JavaScript, you can store values in something called variables. They are